Web design is so much more than just making something look pretty. So today I'm breaking down 3 of the most common mistakes I see so many beginner web designers make that could be preventing your website from converting, from performing well, and from ranking high on search engines. So let's talk about mistake number 1. The first mistake I see a lot is not understanding what actually makes a website perform well. That means understanding how SEO works, understanding kind of the framework and the back end of a website, I believe can really help you become a better web designer. Because if you understand the framework of your website, the code language of your website, you're able to understand if it's going to perform well and what could be preventing it from loading fast and being optimized. Now, I'm not saying that if you want to be a web designer that you have to become an SEO expert, but I think a lot of the times when we hear website designer, we think of someone just making something look pretty. But a website designer involves so much more. It involves development, it involves knowing how to add call to actions throughout, which I'm going to get to later in the video. It's understanding kind of the psychology behind what is going to make someone want to stay on the page, what is going to make someone want to convert. But outside of all that, it also entails understanding how your website's actually going to perform and hold up on search engines. And this is so important, and I really want to make it clear that SEO is something that you really should understand, at least the basics of. You don't have to become an expert in it. So here are the main things I would recommend understanding in the SEO realm of web design to really set you apart and to hopefully get your clients' websites performing really well. The first thing is understanding the hierarchy of your titles on your website. H1 is something you can assign your headings on your website. I'd recommend only having one H1 per page, which is the main title of the page, which is basically going to tell Google or search engines what this page is even about. So make sure that you have the H1 set, but also that you have your H2, H3, H4, H5, and your paragraph and body fonts set as well. So H1s are definitely important, but H2s are also important to set on your website. These are for any of the titles in your sections, and H3s should be set for any subsections throughout the website. Not only are the H1s and H2s and H3s important for SEO, but it's also important for the users on your page, because if you don't have any clear headings or titles, it's going to be so confusing on what they're reading. They're just going to see a bunch of text on a page and not really be able to navigate it and understand what each section is about. And at the end of the day, the user intent of your website is absolutely the most important thing for SEO. You have to make sure that your clients or your ideal customers and audience are landing on a page and that their questions are getting answered. And if they're not able to read what each section is about, they're probably going to click off and not convert. I mean, think about it. Put yourself in the shoes of a user on a website. You're scanning through the site and you're probably just quickly seeing those headings and deciding whether or not you want to stay on a section. Same thing goes for your website, your clients' websites. Make sure those headings are clear. But it's also important for accessibility, which is something I'm going to talk about in this video. And for accessibility purposes, headings actually help the visually impaired scroll and scan through your website. So having a clear hierarchy of your headings is so important for accessibility, for SEO, and so much more. The second really important SEO thing to do on your websites is naming your images properly. I'm gonna call myself out here because I am not the greatest at this, especially on my own design portfolio. So yeah, I need to work on this, but I do know that naming your images is super helpful for SEO. So you can name them with descriptive file names, add alt text so search engines know what's in the photo. That's going to be really helpful for when the, spiders or whatever crawl your website and decide where to rank it, or if it's actually answering the question people are entering into those search engines. It's important to make sure that your images actually line up with the content. And the next very important thing to know is your site speed. So I know that I use Page Speed Insights. I believe that's Google's page speed tester. It's a really great one because it will actually tell you what to fix on the website, and it gives really descriptive directions on how to fix it. So I would recommend keeping your website as fast as possible. This is part of the reason I've been redesigning my website on Framer, because Framer really leads with content instead of having like a bulky design language on the back end. So I'm very curious to see how my page speed compares from when I use Divi and WordPress, which Divi is a pretty bulky design platform. It's a design builder and it has its own design language, so it can create some more bulk on your website. It's still a great platform and tool and builder, and I do like it, but on Framer I have noticed that it does seem a little bit faster. So it'll be interesting to compare the speed test, and let me know if you guys want to see that. I can make a whole video about that. But a lot of the times I see beginner website designers upload images that are just far too big. I try to keep my images under 1 megabytes, even smaller than that if possible. That way the website can load as fast as possible, and that the images are just such a small thing to fix and change, but can make a world of difference for how your website is performing. I actually just posted inside of my Patreon a podcast episode about how SEO is changing. It is changing so much for website designers. It's a little bit more, all the things I chatted about in that podcast episode are a little bit more advanced, but if you want to learn more about how to make sure your websites are performing well, what to keep an eye out for now that AI has entered the picture in search engines, definitely go check out that podcast episode. I have a link down below for you guys to join the Patreon for 15% off, and it's super affordable to join. I'd love to have you guys in there to connect. But yeah, I shared so much about SEO and how the entire landscape of SEO has changed over the last year and honestly over the last few months. So definitely check that out and stay informed on how SEO constantly evolves and changes. So if you are a beginner website designer, I would think of SEO as the foundation of your house. You want to make sure that foundation is set up properly, it's built really well, and then the design is just a cherry on top. You can think about it just like a house, like your interior design is the fun part, but making sure the foundation is there is so important. The second mistake I see so many beginner website designers make is not adding call to actions throughout the website. This is important because when your audience or people are coming into your website, they need to be guided. They need to be told what to do next, and you are in the driver's seat of telling them where to go now. So I would really recommend going to some of your favorite websites and just looking at it from a strategic lens of how are they strategically guiding their audience to click to the next page or to convert or to reach out. It's so important to know how to add those call to actions in strategically so it doesn't look like you're just saying contact us, contact us, contact us. You want to make sure that it's actually speaking to the audience and it's answering that user intent, which is something I mentioned about in the SEO. So definitely make sure that either you hire a professional copywriter that knows how to sprinkle in not only these keywords for SEO, but also how to really speak to your target audience and guide them to take action. It's so important because I feel like a lot of us will just design a website to look pretty, but it just sits there and the audience doesn't know what to do now. So if I were a beginner website designer or talking to a beginner website designer, my first question would be, what is the main action you want users to take on your website? Do you want them to buy a product? Do you want them to contact you? Do you want them to get a freebie on your website so you can then bring them into your email marketing? What is the action you want them to take, not only throughout the whole website, but on each page and honestly in each section? If you don't have any clear call to actions, it's going to be such a missed opportunity. So I have to share this with you guys because we really nowadays have such a short attention span. So making sure that the call to actions are honestly sprinkled throughout the entire website, also maybe close to the top of the page so you're not missing any opportunities to connect with that client or that person or customer, whatever it is you're doing on your website. You don't want to miss those opportunities, so make sure that those actions are placed strategically. I truly believe that having strategic call to actions is what creates a really great user experience. But not only that, it is what makes a difference between just a pretty site from an actual profitable, functioning, well-performing, beautiful website. So it's a huge difference. The The third mistake I see so many beginner website designers make as well, I see this one probably the most commonly, and that is having bad accessibility and readability. I personally believe that this is what sets apart a beginner designer from a professional designer, because knowing how every single person, no matter their disability or maybe if they're colorblind, knowing how the site can be accessible for anyone who enters into it is so important. There are so many websites where you can add the color palette in to make sure that it passes the accessibility test. I also like to change my color palette to black and white to see if it has great contrast, because if all of your colors in your palette are muted, it's going to be really hard for someone to read it. Even someone like a family member, a mom, a grandma, it could be really difficult for them to read, which you'll lose out on another opportunity to convert someone that either wants to buy from you or work with you. So here's 3 rules that I would keep in mind to keep that readability and accessibility at the forefront of your brain when you are designing websites. First is to make sure that your color contrast is ideal. I'll link down below some website accessibility tests so you can really test out your color palette and make sure that it is accessible and that it passes those tests. So I would probably stay away from adding a really light text color on a dark background. It's just a little bit more difficult to read. I've noticed that honestly the cleanest like beige or white background with a dark text is just so much more accessible and readable. So that's something I would keep in mind. But I also would keep in mind the text sizing. I know that like for design purposes, sometimes having like a smaller dainty text is so pretty and it looks nice, but it's really not accessible and also can be really difficult to read. So I would keep in mind having that text size at least for body fonts, at least 16px. I think that's honestly like the minimum that I would do, or 14, but it really depends on the actual font, the boldness, the thickness of it, and making sure that whoever enters in your website can actually read all the writing on it. Another thing that I am starting to think more about in my own website is making sure that links and buttons can be accessed not just from a mouse, but also from a keyboard. This is what makes a website accessible, and it actually in some states I believe that you have to have an accessibility, like you have to pass the accessibility test for your website to actually be legal, I believe. I just double checked my facts on that, and in the US it is actually required that websites for government agencies, schools, organizations receiving any federal funding, that they have to comply with the website accessibility rules that are actually outlined in a Rehabilitation Act. So it's really important to understand how to make a website accessible, but also many businesses fall under the ADA, which is the Americans with Disabilities Act. And courts have ruled that websites count as public spaces, meaning they need to be accessible to people with disabilities. So it's really important to keep in mind what makes a website accessible, the colors, the font sizes, making sure that they can navigate it without having to use a mouse. And there's a lot of other little things that you can keep in mind, but I would say that those are the most important things to double check on your website today. Not only is readability and accessibility important to speak to anyone who might be landing on your website, it's also important to make sure that your paragraphs aren't dragging on and on and on, and they're not like indented and it just doesn't look super clean. A lot of people will probably click out and not convert, so that also falls under making sure that it has amazing readability. When you're focusing on not only the readability and the accessibility of your website, you are going to be creating much more professional looking websites, and it's going to be a lot more inclusive as well. So that is a mistake I had to mention, because I can't even tell you guys the amount of times I've gone onto a website and immediately click off because either I can't read it, it's overwhelming, or the colors are just not working very well. So it's one of the biggest mistakes I see, and it's so important to understand what makes a website accessible, what makes the color contrast actually pass the test. Those are things that I would highly recommend learning before you get too far in the web design world. So just to recap on everything I shared today, the 3 most important things to know as a beginner website designer and to avoid these mistakes is number 1, understanding SEO basics, understanding how it works, like the back end of a website. Just understand a website at its core and at its foundation. The second thing we talked about is not forgetting your call to actions. This is important for converting your client's audience, your audience, and also giving your website a really amazing navigation and user experience. And the third thing we just talked about is the accessibility and the readability of your website, making sure your website's inclusive, that it's easy to read, easy to navigate, easy to see and look at. That's so important to actually make a website look and perform professional. So if you found this video helpful, it would mean the world to me if you guys subscribe to my channel down below. If you want to learn more about website designs, especially if you're a beginner, I like to teach about a lot of the things I wish I knew when I first started. So I hope that this was helpful. Let me know if it was by giving me a thumbs up. Comment down below anything that you learned from this video that you found helpful. But I appreciate you guys so much for being here, and I will see you in my next video.